John Lennox gæstede Danmark for at tale om tro og videnskab. John Lennox er professor på University of Oxford og har doktorgrader i matematik og filosofi samt en mastergrad i bioetik. I vores nuværende kultur bliver der ofte argumenteret for, at det er umuligt at være intellektuel og samtidig have en tro på Gud. Derfor har John Lennox mødt mange mennesker, som end ikke tør undersøge den kristne tro, i frygt for at blive betragtet som useriøse. Men har videnskaben udryddet Gud?
I debated Peter Singer not long ago in Melbourne. Peter Singer is the world's most famous ethicist, professor of bioethics at Princeton. And it was very interesting because I said to the audience at the beginning, they asked us for a little bit of bio, so I was totally open, and I told them what I told you earlier, that my parents were Christian and so on. So Peter comes on and he says, you know, that's really my problem, you see, with people who believe in God. People tend to remain in the faith in which they've been brought up. So I waited my turn, and after Peter handed it over to me, I said, Peter, I think the audience would be very interested to know about your biography. Tell me, I said, were your parents atheists? He said, yes, they were. Oh, I said, So you remained in the faith that you were brought up in? Oh, but he said, it isn't a faith. Oh, I said, Peter, I'm sorry, I thought you believed it. Now, that reveals immense confusion. Now, this wasn't Richard Dawkins speaking. I could understand it coming from him because he doesn't know any philosophy. But this was Peter Singer speaking, who is a philosopher. And he doesn't realize that his atheism is a belief system. What I believe is a belief system. What he doesn't believe, what he believes is not a belief system. Why does he take that view? Well, for several reasons. You see, when people meet me, particularly if they're called Richard Dawkins, they call me a man of faith. That's an insult. Because what he means by that is, Lennox believes where there's no evidence. Because one of the cleverest moves that have been made by the so-called new atheists has been to redefine the concept of faith. So what is faith? It is A, a religious concept, and B, it means believing where there's no evidence. Dangerously wrong on both counts. Believing where there's no evidence is blind faith, and that's very dangerous. It's the kind of thing that causes young men to guide jet airliners into tall buildings. Blind faith is very dangerous. But the new atheists seem to think that the word faith simply means blind faith. So when they meet someone like me who is a Christian, there's no point in talking to me because by definition I believe where there is no evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, let me make this very clear. Christianity is not based on blind faith. If that were true, get rid of your Bible because it claims to be evidence. Let's look at what the Bible positively says, the end of John's Gospel, where John is explaining why he wrote his book. Many other things Jesus did in the presence of his disciples which are not written in this book. But these are written in order that you might believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life in his name. In other words, here's the evidence on which faith can be based. I'd be an utter fool to stand here and talk to you about faith in Christianity if I didn't believe it was evidence-based. So that's point number one. Point number two is, by redefining faith as blind faith, it blinds the new atheist to the fact that faith is essential in science. Einstein saw that. He said, I cannot imagine a physicist or a scientist without that faith. What did he mean? What faith? Faith, the kind of faith you need to do science at all. Why would I do science? Well, because I believe that the universe is at least in part accessible to the human mind. You've got to believe that before you start doing any science at all. And my teacher of quantum physics at Cambridge, Professor Sir John Polkinghorne, used to, in many of his books, he points this out. Physics is powerless to explain its faith in the rational intelligibility of the universe for the simple reason that you need to believe that the universe is rationally accessible before you do any physics at all. Now comes the interesting bit. Let's go back to our two worldviews. Here comes my greatest difficulty with atheism, and it has nothing to do with Christianity whatsoever. It has everything to do with science, and here it is. Let me wear my atheist hat for a moment. And I'm a scientist, and I'm doing science. What do I do it with? Well, you say you do it with your mind. Okay, but what is the mind? The mind is the brain. So what is the brain? Well, the brain is a biological organism that is the end product of a mindless, unguided process. I see. So the thing I'm doing science with, in the end, is the final product of a mindless, unguided process. Yes. Now, I put it to you. You've all got computers, iPads, iPhones. If you thought that they were the end product of a mindless, unguided process, would you have bought one? Would you use one? Would you trust one? Absolutely not. Why not? Because products of mindless, unguided processes are useless. Why do we believe that this is useful? You see, my big objection, ladies and gentlemen, to atheism is not because it's anti-God. It is anti-God. But it's because it undermines the very rationality that we need to do science. Now, this is not a trivial point. It has been written about recently. It comes from Darwin, oddly enough, who reflected that he had doubts about the reliability of the human mind, since in his view it had descended from the minds, if they were minds, of much lowlier creatures, and how could you trust it? And that argument has been revived in contemporary times by many philosophers, some of them atheists. The most recent of them is Thomas Nagel, professor of philosophy in New York. And also Alvin Plantinga, a leading American world-class philosopher. And he points out, if Dawkins is right, that the human mind is the brain, is the end product of a mindless, unguided process, then that takes away any reason for believing in anything the human mind produces, including the theory that it is the end product of a mindless, unguided process. It contradicts itself. It proves too much. So it won't do. Christianity talks sense here, doesn't it? Why can we do science? Well, because the universe out there was created by the same God who is ultimately responsible for the mind in here. That was the motor that drove modern science. So it fits together. So you see, the atheistic explanation, far from being scientific, I find positively embarrassing. Because it makes no sense. It undermines rationality. It proves too much. And so I reject it. So it's very important for us to realize, to sum this little bit up, that faith, in the biblical sense, is a commitment based on evidence, just like your commitments to your friends. I've been married 44 years to the same person, which is a bit unusual these days, isn't it? Why do I trust my wife? For no reason? Of course not. The evidence has mounted and mounted and mounted. When I proposed to her, I didn't know everything about her. She didn't know everything about me. But there was enough grounds to make a commitment. And it's exactly the same when it comes to God, who is, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, not a theory, but a person. God is much bigger than a theory. There are many theories about God, and they're very important. But God is not simply a theory. God is a person. So it seems to me that as we begin to look at this, and I've got this argument and many other arguments in my book, as a help to people, the thousands of people who over time have asked me some of the reasons why I as a scientist feel that science has not buried God at all. And I want to give time for these questions, so I want to come to what I consider to be one of the most important arguments of all. Do you remember when we started, I said there are basically two major worldviews in this debate. One of them starts with mass energy. That's what the ancients called the particles of the void, but let me give it its contemporary name. Mass energy and everything, including mind, is derivative from mass energy. That is the materialist view. Well, I find it very interesting to do a little bit of an experiment with my colleagues, many of them. If you go to the beach on the coast of Denmark, some sunny Saturday, and you see on the beach let's say the 12 letters of your name written on the beach, what do you think? Do you think, well, that's a very interesting product of a mindless, unguided process? No, you do not. You say, somebody's been there who knows me. You immediately, intuitively, instinctively, without hesitation, infer an intelligent origin to what's written on the beach. Now, you don't know, of course. That's what written on the beach may have been written by an automatic machine, a program from a space station outside the orbit of Jupiter, and so on and so forth. What you do know, though, that at the back of it all, there will be an intelligence, yes? Okay. Well, now let me translate you from the beach in Denmark into a molecular biology laboratory. And let's imagine there's a magic stereoscopic microscope there that hasn't been invented yet. You'll see in a moment why. And so you come into this laboratory, and you're now a molecular biologist. And you look down this stereo microscope, and in it you see an amazing sight. You see an uncoiling double helix. And as it uncoils, it's spitting letters off into space. C, G, A, T, T, G, C, T, T, A, G, T. And you say, what is that? Well, that's the human genome. Well, it seems to be very long. It's going on and on and on. Yes, it does go on and on. It's 3.5 times 10 to the 9 letters long. 3.5 billion letters long. Well, what do you mean letters? Well, they're letters in the sense that they are codons of a chemical alphabet, and they code for something else. They code for the proteins. Oh, I see. So the codons have a significance. That's why you call them codons. That's why you use computer speak. That's very interesting. And is the order important? Of course it's important. Get one or two of them wrong and it might work, but usually get one of them wrong like any computer program and the thing stops working. And then you ask the question. And what's the origin of that? The longest word that human beings have ever discovered. Oh, I say to you, the origin of that's obvious, old chap. It's chance and necessity. What? You mean chance and the laws of nature? Yes. But half a minute. We were on the beach a few minutes ago. You saw the 12 letters of your name, and you immediately said intelligence. What's going on, do you think? How is it that confronted, and we're the first generation to know this, confronted with the most spectacular evidence of intelligent causation, we close our minds and say it must have happened somehow by chance and the laws of nature, when we never say the same thing in any other area of experience, bar none? Seems to be something's going on. Ladies and gentlemen, there are two worldviews. And the one you could sum up by saying in the beginning was mass energy, in the beginning were the particles, and the human brain and the human mind are derivative. And then, of course, there is the idea of God. That's derivative, but it's a figment of our imagination. There is another view. It goes like this. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things came to be through Him. And without Him, nothing came to be that came to be. The ancient Greeks at the time of John and before were very interested in our universe. Tell me, which makes more sense? The notion that it's the particles and mass energy that were in the beginning, and by a mindless, unguided process, it creeps its way up to intelligence, or it's the exact opposite way round. In the beginning was the Word. Do you know, the physicists are beginning to get there, aren't they? Because it has been realized that information is not reducible to physics and chemistry. Of course not. I never forget once, it's happened many times since, but the first time it happens is always very striking. We have lovely dinners in our college. It'd be lovely to be able to invite you all to one, but I can't. And one night we are placed by decision of somebody else, and I found myself sitting beside a very famous biochemist. So in usual Oxford fashion, he said to me, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a pure mathematician." Oh, he said, "How dreadfully boring." And I saw that he meant it. And so I backed off a bit. I said, "Oh, but it's not as boring as all that. Because, you see, I'm interested in bigger things." He said, "Like what?" "Well," I said, "like the status of the universe, you know. Is it created or not?" "Oh, dear," he said, "it's far worse than I thought." He said, "Listen, I'm an atheist. I'm a reductionist. We're going to have a miserable evening because we've absolutely nothing to talk about." That's a really good start to a dinner party, isn't it? So I looked at him and I said, "Oh," I said, "that's fascinating. We're going to have the best conversation ever." And he said, "What?" I said, "You're a reductionist." He said, "Yes, I'm a reductionist." "Well," I said, "so am I in a way." I said, "I know 3 different kinds of reductionism. Which kind are you?" Well, that was a bit difficult, you see. And I helped him a bit because I'm a kind Irishman. So I said, "Let's start on our common ground." I said, "Methodological reductionism." I said, "You know, in mathematics, we get a big problem. We can't solve it. So what do? We divide it up into little problems, and we study the little problems. And that gives us insight on the big problem." "Yes," he said, "we do that." Oh, I said, "Good. So we're both reductionists in that sense." But I said, "I really think you're an ontological reductionist. That is, you believe that in the end, everything reduces to physics and chemistry." He said, "That's it." Well, I said, "Why don't we do an experiment?" I said, "What?" He said, "At the table." I said, "Of course, this is Oxford. Why don't we do an experiment?" At the dinner table, he said, "What's the experiment?" I said, "It's this menu here." So he raised it up and he said, "Roast chicken." It wasn't even in French, not very imaginative. And he said, "What's the problem?" I said, "Well, look at it. ROAST, chicken, CHICKEN. So what's the problem?" I said, "You're a reductionist." "Yes," he said. "Okay," I said, "these marks, ROAST, they carry meaning, don't they?" He said, "Yes, they do. They are semiotic. That is, they're signs that carry meaning." From the Greek word semeion, a sign. He said, "That's right." I said, "You're a reductionist, an ontological reductionist." "Yes," he said, "absolutely." "Okay," I said, "here's the question for you. Please explain to me the way those marks carry meaning, and explain it to me in terms of the physics and chemistry of the paper and ink." There was dead silence. And his wife was beside him, and rather too loudly, she did this. And she said, "Get out of that if you can." He didn't try. I'll never forget what he said. He said, "Goodness me," he said, "it can't be done." He said, "For 40 years I've gone into my laboratory at Oxford believing it could be done. And now I see it can't be done." I was so shocked and surprised at his honesty that I backtracked and I said, "But physics and chemistry have only been going about 500 or 600 years. He said, "It doesn't matter. You cannot get to meaning by studying the physics and chemistry of the paper and ink." And then it dawned on him that I was not bright enough to have thought of that idea. So he said, "Where did you get that argument?" I said, "Okay, I confess it. I got it from a Nobel Prize winner." Oh, he said, "That's all right." And ladies and gentlemen, it is all right, isn't it? It is amazing to my mind how a simple thing like that, very often, I've repeated it many times, you can use it too. Roger Sperry won the Nobel Prize for Medicine. The meaning of the message will not be found in the paper and ink. Or to quote Wittgenstein again, the meaning of the system will not be found inside the system. The meaning of the universe, ladies and gentlemen, won't be found in it ultimately unless the one who created it enters it. And that's the biggest claim of all, of course, isn't it? In the beginning was the Word. All things were made by Him. And the Word became flesh. Do you believe that? I gave a lecture to 700 or 800 physicists on one occasion, and one of them came up to me afterwards. He said, "Professor Lennox, that was very interesting, but I detected you're a Christian." He was very clever, you see. He said, "I suspected you're a Christian." I said, "I am a Christian." "Well," he said, "no." He said, "Come on. All this talk about science and the fine-tuning of the universe and all, marvelous," he said, "but look, you're a Christian. You're obliged to believe that Jesus was simultaneously God and human." I said, "That's right." He said, "Can you explain that to me?" Well, I said, "That's a question. That's a big question, isn't it? Can I ask you a couple of simpler questions first?" He said, "Go right ahead." So I said, "Tell me, what is consciousness?" And he thought for a while and he said, "I don't know." Oh, I said, "Okay. Let me try something simpler." I said, "What is energy?" And he said, "Well, we can measure it and we can..." I said, "That wasn't the question. What is it?" A little longer hesitation, and he said, "We don't know." I said, "I'm glad you said that, because that's what Richard Feynman, one of the world's most distinguished physicists, says. We don't know." "Oh," I said, "that's very interesting. Tell me," I say, "do you believe in consciousness?" "Yes," he said, "I do." "Oh," I said, "that's very interesting. You don't know what it is?" "No. But you believe in it?" "Yes, very interesting. Tell me, do you believe in energy?" "Yes," he said, "but you don't know what it is." I said, I'm thinking of writing you off as a physicist." "Oh," he said, "please don't." I said, "But you were going to write me off 5 minutes ago, weren't you?" Because I couldn't answer a question that's infinitely deeper than that question. I said, "Let's pursue this. Why do you believe in consciousness and energy when you don't know what they are?" Well, he didn't know, so I helped him a little bit again. I said, "I think you believe in them partly because, although you don't exactly know what they are, conceptually, they have explanatory power." He said, "That's right." I said, "Of course, I can't explain to you how God can become human. But I said, I believe that it's true for exactly the same reason. It's the only explanation that makes sense of the facts. Our conversation continued for a long time. Sometimes, we can't answer all the questions, and that's why I've told you the story. Because sometimes questions go so deep, but there is a way to approach unanswerable questions. And as I look at the witness of history, the New Testament, and the witness of my own experience, I come to the conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, that science has not buried God, but science can be one of the small pointers to help us on our way to see that God is real. Thank you very much indeed.